My name is Dr. Mary Wendt. I am going to give you a quick overview on paraphrasing and doing so to make sure that you do not plagiarize when you do your paraphrasing. So, very quickly, paraphrasing is just taking someone else's written or spoken ideas and putting them in your own words. So there are only a few times when you actually should paraphrase. This is when you take other people's ideas that are large and sum them up. So several pages of ideas, or maybe even a whole page of ideas summed up in your own words, or several different ideas that you want to synthesize and put together and show their relationship, or taking some ideas of an author that are complicated and putting them in your own words. So those are the reasons that we paraphrase. It's to make ideas clearer, simpler, or summed up more quickly for your reader. You do not want to paraphrase, though, when the author has used words that are really important, specific terms, phrases, words that they use that need to be quoted. You also don't want to paraphrase if an author said something really well and their language is elegant, then you should be quoting. But you also don't want to paraphrase if the idea of an author is very brief. Then you might as well just put it in the author's words and quote them rather than paraphrasing. So I want to walk you through. So there are some rules when you paraphrase. These are the these are the musts to make sure that you are not plagiarizing. So this is the key to making sure you do this right. The first thing and the most important thing is attributing your language to the source it came from. So just as you would when you quote, you have to tell your reader where the ideas came from. Not to do that is plagiarism. You also have to make sure that you put things in your own words. There are some exceptions. So, for example, let's say you're talking about when Abraham Lincoln was born. Okay, you don't need to paraphrase Abraham Lincoln's name. It's a name. You can't really paraphrase it. You can't put Abraham Lincoln into your own words. Or the date when he was born. Those things, and they don't need quotation marks. But because you do have that specific information, the name of a person, the date he was born, you need an in-text citation. So if you have specific information like data, dates, names, places, that kind of thing, then you also need a citation, even if you put the sentence in your own words. Regardless, at the end of the paraphrase, so regardless of how many sentences you are paraphrasing, at the end of that, you do need a citation, and you have to make sure you put your source on your page of sources, whether that's MLA and a works cited page or APA and a references page. That source needs to go on your sources page. So you do need a citation, and you do need it on your works cited page, regardless of whether you quote or paraphrase. I also want to go back to this attribution point because it's very important. Every sentence has to have attribution in it. So if you have a sentence where you say, Smith said, blah, 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 and you talk about what Smith said, and then you put a period and start a new sentence, but you're still talking about Smith's ideas, then you must say, Smith also said, again. So you have to keep using that Smith said, Smith said, Smith said language in every single sentence. So you can change it up. Smith believes, Smith says, Smith thinks that, but you need to have, or he, you can use pronouns, but you have to include that in every sentence. That attribution is key to making sure that you are not plagiarizing. So we're going to walk through how to do this paraphrase. Now, normally this is not something I would paraphrase. I would probably quote it directly because it's very brief. But for the sake of this exercise and to show you how to do this, I'm choosing a really short quote just because it's easier. Okay, so this is the original quote. This is from my daughter Amber. We were talking on the phone. So we're just going to pretend that this is from a written source. But this is the quote. We were talking about gluten. And so here's the quote. The most important thing to understand is that for over 90% of people, the only issue is a gluten sensitivity, but not a gluten allergy. I suggest you go without gluten for a week, then reintroduce gluten to see if you feel any different from one week to the next. So that's the quote we're going to work with. So the first step, anytime you paraphrase or quote, is to make sure you have some context. You don't start paragraphs with sources. You start paragraphs with your own language and your own ideas. So here, this gives us some context. The yellow, what's in yellow here, is gluten bad for us? I've always wondered what the fuss is about. And why so many people have gone gluten-free these days. And then I would work on providing this information. So that's the first step, is having some context. The second step is making sure that you tell us what your source is. So even if it's just a paraphrase, you still need to tell us who this is or where this information is coming from. So here's our introduction of the source. So I thought I would ask my daughter Amber about this, since she's a registered dietitian. That is the language I'm using here because she's my daughter and we were having a phone conversation. However, make note of this here. If this was an article that I read somewhere, then I still have to tell us what this source is. So it would look probably something like this. Amber Rosales, a registered dietitian, wrote an article titled What to Do About Gluten. So that's just, I'm making that up, obviously, but that would go here in place of what I have, should that be an article rather than just a phone conversation I had with my daughter. Okay, so then the next step is to make sure you're putting this in your own words. Now, remember that normally you would not take such a short and simple thing and paraphrase it. You would put it in quotation marks. But for the purpose of this exercise, I chose something short just to make it easier. So here I've taken this and put it in my own words. Most people, over 90%, have a gluten sensitivity, not an allergy. Cut gluten for a week and then eat it again to see what happens. Notice that this right here, I don't have to put that in quote marks. I don't have to put gluten sensitivity. That's not Amber's original language. She didn't make that up or, use some sort of unique phrasing. So that doesn't have to be in quotation marks. However, were it something that she had said that was really unique, that would go in quotation marks. So that is putting it in your own words. Then you have to do this attribution. And this is the important part. And this is what gets a lot of people into trouble because they leave this step out. So notice how I added, she said that. Okay, so I thought I would ask my daughter Amber about this since she's a registered dietitian. I have to include this language because that makes it clear that this is her idea and this is what she said. And then notice there's a period here and I started a new sentence. So I have to add, she recommended that because I am still paraphrasing from her. This right here, all this in blue, was her idea. So I have to make sure I attribute. This is the attribution that I'm talking about. And that's the key. If you don't do that, you are plagiarizing, okay? And then I have to include this. This citation leads me to the works cited page. You have to have this citation at the end. And this is MLA, so all I need is the author's last name, which is the first word on your works cited page. And that is how to do a paraphrase.